University Political Science honours students who are with us today. It's good to have you here. As you know, I've just returned from the Pacific Mission where I led a New Zealand delegation to Samoa, Tonga and Niue. The visit allowed me to reinforce New Zealand's strong relationship with those countries and our commitment to development in the region. While in Samoa, I announced that New Zealand will invest $1 million to help boost Samoa's tourism sector. This will be used to upgrade a number of visitor attractions and improve information and access to them. Our relationship with Tonga is in good shape. During my visit, I announced New Zealand will invest $2 million to support the upgrade of Tonga's national stadium. We will also contribute $5 million to rebuilding schools in Tonga following the devastating cyclone Ian. My visit to Niue was my second as Prime Minister, and it's great to see tourism in Niue is increasing. The expanded Matawai Resort is attracting more visitors, which has driven up demand for air travel, resulting in Air New Zealand putting on a second flight to Niue each week. I was pleased to announce New Zealand will contribute $1 million over 5 years to help Niue's tourism development. We will also provide $250,000 to assist the government of Niue to build its supply of renewable energy. So our presence in the Pacific Islands remains strong, and our continued support is important to many Pacific people. In fact, you may have just seen that Murray McCully's announcement this afternoon that we're contributing $3.8 million to the Fred Hollows Foundation for a new regional eye care centre in the Solomon Islands. This will significantly improve eye health in the Solomons and throughout the Pacific, and it expands on the good work the foundation does, which this government has previously supported. Today it was confirmed by his office that John Banks' resignation has been sent to the Speaker. Clearly, given the proximity to the general election on September the 20th, it makes little sense to hold a by-election. The Leader of the House will arrange the appropriate motion for the House to consider in the next sitting week. On Sunday I'll leave for an official visit to the United States with programs in New York and Washington DC. In New York, my program will focus on activities to advance New Zealand's campaign for a non-permanent seat on the UN Security Council in 2015-16. New Zealand's campaign is progressing well, but there are still some months left before the vote, and we're taking nothing for granted. My program in Washington DC will centre around the invitation to meet with President Barack Obama on Friday the 20th of June. While I meet the President regularly on the margins of international summits, this more formal meeting in the Oval Office is an important opportunity to take stock of our bilateral relationship and to exchange views on current issues of mutual interest, including, of course, potential free trade agreement through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. My program will also include meetings with a range of senior ministers from President Obama's cabinet, congressional representatives and business leaders. I'll return to New Zealand on Sunday the 22nd of June, and just to note that due to the fact that we're travelling, there will be no post-cabinet press conference next week. Just in terms of my own activities this week, I'm heading to Tauranga tomorrow for a number of visits, and then on Wednesday I'll be attending field days in the Waikato, as I usually do. I'll be in Christchurch on Thursday, attending various events, and on Friday I'll be in Auckland.
What will happen with the employment relations legislation?
Well, it's currently before the Select Committee, as I understand it. So, in principle, either some other political support will emerge that will allow us to pass the legislation, or in all probability, it'll be put into the carryover motion. And then, if we're the government that's returned after September the 20th, then it'll be reintroduced to the House.
So that means without John Banks' vote, you can't pass it?
That would be my initial view of how the political land lies, but we'll obviously probably go and test that. But I think that's probably the only legislation that for sure was sitting at around that sort of 61-60 margin.
So workers' tea breaks are safe from interference, effectively, from their bosses?
Yeah, but I mean, they're always safe. It's just a matter of a little bit of flexibility in practical situations, like someone who, for instance, works in a air traffic control tower in a very small airport. I mean, having a bit of flexibility actually makes sense. So there's nothing terribly radical in that legislation, but typically it's fairly divided on the economic grounds.
Any merit, in an independent body being set up to look at complaints around electoral law?
Not really. I mean, I think over the course of the last 6 years I've been Prime Minister, and prior to that there have been cases where there have been concerns about the administration of electoral law. I mean, you've seen that with the pledge card spending from Labor in the previous administration. You've seen it very more recently with David Cunliffe sending a tweet on the day of a by-election, all of which are breaches of electoral law. Whether you actually need a special process around that, I don't know, might overcomplicate things.
The Police Association is signalling they think that the police will now take a much tougher line with these sorts of cases and will intervene more. Is that likely to put a bit of a chill through some MPs in terms of them dotting all their I's and crossing T's?
Well, I always advise my MPs to be very cautious. At the end of the day, I think people have got to expect that those are public documents. They are serious documents when you sign them, and if you get it wrong, as we've seen with Mr. Banks, the repercussions of that are very significant. So I'm not sure. I mean, in the end, the police have constabulary independence. We value that independence, and we don't intend to intervene in it. My guess is that they take these issues seriously, but as you've seen in the past, I mean, they exercised discretion when it came to Labor's overspending with the pledge card, they exercised discretion when it came to David Cunliffe in relation to the tweet he sent on the day of the by-election. Initially they decided not to prosecute in the case of Mr. Banks. It doesn't stop someone taking a civil proceeding.
Well, what do you make of Labour leader David Cunliffe's call for John Banks's Queen's Birthday honour to potentially be stripped?
Well, as in every case of somebody that falls foul of the law, I always consider whether a person should retain their honours. I take a very considered and cautious view of that, because when we bestow an honour on somebody, it's a very significant event, and I always want to get a bit of perspective around that. History tells you there are very few honours that have been taken off people. You remember the debate we had around Doug Graham. So in the first instance, this is a matter that's before the courts. Let's see what happens as a result of sentencing or any appeals that Mr. Banks might lodge in due course. If I'm still the Prime Minister, then I'll give that matter some consideration.
Do you expect him to come back and do a valedictory?
I'd be surprised if he did.
Do you want him to?
It'd be a totally matter for him, but I mean, in reality, he's resigning by Friday. The House doesn't sit till the following week. I'm not even sure if technically that's possible.
Do you think he should lose his knighthood, or is this sort of just politics going too far? Lose his...
I think we'd like to give him a knighthood, but then let's cheer him up. But look, I don't want to prejudge that. I mean, in the end, it's a matter. Let's see how the thing progresses. There's a whole lot of different factors at play here.
Just in regards to the Employment Relations Amendment Bill, have you been talking to the Māori Party about supporting that now?
We haven't yet. I mean, at some point I'll have some discussions with them, but I'll be surprised if they vote for it.
And what are the sticking points do you believe that the Māori Party has with it?
Well, generally they've voted fairly conservatively when it comes to us wanting to make changes around employment legislation. They'll have a number of issues you might want to ask them about it. I mean, everything that's happening in that legislation, in my view, is at the mild end of employment relations reform. But there's, they've typically had more support from the unions, and there's certain aspects around collective bargaining, and then I'd be surprised if the Māori Party votes for it.
If it doesn't get through in this term of government, are you hoping to resurrect it in the next after the next election?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'll campaign on those issues, and if we're the government and we're in a position to pass it as part of our 100 working day program or whatever, then we'll do that.
It must be frustrating though, given you've got so close.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth putting a bit of perspective on it. We've got 5 weeks left. A lot of that time is going to be used up with either valedictories in the last week. This is still a huge work program that's non-contentious that we can pass. It's not a really significant issue for the government, but it's something we would have liked to pass because we think it's an important and useful piece of legislation. But in the end, that's the position we find ourselves in, and I think it's best that we do what we do.
What would it have achieved for employers and employees getting it through?
Oh, well, it's a range of things. I mean, you made the point around flexible tea breaks, but I mean, there are people, for instance, that work in small airfields, and under the law, they're actually meant to take a tea break at the one time a plane might actually be landing, and that's just pretty silly. So I think a bit of flexibility in there. There's a number of things around collective bargaining and good faith, and ultimately when an employment dispute is actually gone past the good faith provisions, can be settled.
When do we expect to get a signal from you on when you make any deal or not in Epsom in terms of ACT?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I literally haven't had that discussion with our senior colleagues in any great way, but I mean, we're, whatever it is, 15 or 16 weeks from the election, so I would have thought soonish, sometime clearly in the next 15 to 16 weeks will be useful for the voters of those electorates, but not this week and not next week.
Are you still leaving open the possibility of a similar sort of arrangement for Colin Craig?
Yeah, it's been, look, as I said at the start of the year, I've identified for the public the political parties I think we could potentially work with to form a government. I've given them an indication that there's 3 parties that we could at least consider whether there might be some sort of accommodation, if you like. I'd like to be a bit more transparent about that, because actually I think that maturity is now there in the New Zealand public that they think it's better to know. But whether we do any accommodations or all of them or none of them is something we'll decide some weeks or months.
What's the hold up though? Because it's basically odds on you're going to do one of the exit. Paul Goldsmith didn't turn up to a debate at the weekend. You've done a fundraiser. Why not just say the deal's on?
Well, we'd like to deal with all of them at one time.
Has Colin Craig approached you or spoken to you about the possibility of standing in his seat, if you're only signal yet?
He's approached me. I haven't had any discussions with him this year. I mean, my understanding was he actually put out a statement, or at least made some statements a few weeks ago saying he wasn't terribly interested in any kind of political accommodation. So I don't know, all of those things will have to be considered. That's what I heard as a second-hand report.
Has he talked to anyone on your side of things about what he might be doing?
I'm not 100% sure. I mean, he knows a few people in our party, and from time to time there are discussions, but I'm not aware of any that have happened recently.
How many New Zealanders have died in Syria since the conflict began?
Well, I can't confirm that number because I simply don't know. What I do have is information about one New Zealander, whereas I was informed in January of this year that there was a high probability that New Zealander could have been killed fighting in Syria. The situation is we don't have evidence to support that, but we've lost contact with him, and as I understand, his family has lost contact with him. So there's a presumption that he's been killed, but we can't absolutely confirm that, as contrasted with the position in Yemen, where we had DNA evidence to support that the person had actually perished.
And had that person been living in New Zealand up until the point that they moved to Syria, do you know? Had they been living somewhere else?
I don't. They've certainly spent some time in New Zealand. Got a funny feeling they'd left from Australia, but I'll need to check that.
What contact did you have? How did you mention you lost contact?
Well, I'm not going to go into all of the forms of contact that we have with people, but all I can tell you is that we haven't had any evidence since January that the person's alive, and on that basis, there's a reasonably high probability that the person's died.
There was a New Zealander, a Chinese-born artist who was believed to have been fighting in rebels since 2012. Wei Ming Chen, was it him?
I'm not going to go into the name of the individual.
What happens
Mainly out of interest in the family.
What happens when they return from these places? When these fighters come back from Syria, the likes of Syria and Yemen, what happens when they return?
Well, it depends on how they're going and what they're doing, but as I've said to you in the past, I mean, one of the functions of the intelligence agencies is to provide information to the government about individuals of interest. For somebody to be of interest, we have to have a significant amount of information that would support the view that they should be monitored, and that warrant has to be co-signed by myself and the Commissioner of Security Warrants. So essentially, if that was a hypothetical situation, then we would or could continue to monitor that person on legitimate grounds, providing the Commission and myself were satisfied that was appropriate. And we may do that if we believe there was a at least credible risk to other New Zealanders.
So
Can we trust what the Syrian representative told the UN? They seem to imply that there was more than one New Zealander who'd been killed in Syria.
Well, I can't give you any better information than the information I've got. I'm not aware of anyone that's been killed there absolutely formally, but I don't know every person that's necessarily travelled to Syria. There are people that carry multiple passports. That's one of the issues. They could come from different locations. I'm certainly aware that the kinds of numbers of people that we're talking about that have New Zealand citizenship and carry a New Zealand passport that have travelled to Syria are likely to be a very small group.
So there may well be more than one New Zealander who's been killed in Syria.
Can't absolutely rule that out, but I simply don't have that information. I don't know whether that's the fact.
What about the young Australian woman whose mother was a New Zealander, Amira Ali? Do you know if she held New Zealand citizenship?
Don't have details on her.
Just on the Electoral Act stuff again, the Electoral Commission, I think in 2011, sort of talked about the possibility or recommended having a bit more teeth to refer cases to authorities, give it more powers essentially. Is that something that could be possible or useful in these types of situations for Reid John Banks?
Specifically for Mr. Banks, or
Well,
just
in
generally?
terms of the issue of, I guess, police complaints around that are political of nature.
I mean, my experience of it is that, you know, we have a very good police force in New Zealand and a very good judiciary, and they have both constabulary and judicial independence, and they go about their work. I mean, if a complaint is made against a politician, in my experience, the police are quite thorough at investigating those because they don't want to be criticised, that they somehow apply a different standard to members of parliament than they would to anybody else in the sort of general public. But you know, I don't have evidence to support that they're not following things through. I think the police do and will always consider, you know, whether there's much to be gained out of, you know, progressing a potential prosecution. But that's actually true for lots and lots of people. I mean, there are a huge number of cases, I'm sure, where the police look at it and actually probably could take a successful prosecution. But the question would be, is it worth it?
Greg O'Connor thinks that there is that there is a feeling that the police don't want to get involved, that they don't want to cause any trouble. And that's got to be a concern, isn't it?
Well, all I can say is that for the most part, they seem to thoroughly looked at cases. But, you know, if I guess they will always consider, you know, the merits of what's going on. If you take Mr. Cunliffe's case, he breached the electoral law when he tweeted on a by-election day. You know, you can criticise the police for not following that up, but equally on the other side of the coin, if they had followed that up and prosecuted, there'd be plenty of people who'd say, oh, for goodness sake, it's a relatively small, minor matter, and you're just simply, you know, playing politics with the situation. So the police are in a very unenviable position here.
Have they lost face by deciding not to prosecute that, given that it led to a guilty verdict?
In my view, no. I mean, the first case was a matter for them to decide, but ultimately anyone's free to take a civil prosecution.
This
Have
man
you
presumably
actually, have
killed
you
him.
read the judgment now? I know you didn't
Yep,
read the
I read it on Friday night, yeah.
And what did you think of it?
Well, it's not for me to critique Justice Wiley, but I mean, it was thorough. You know, in the end, it's for Mr. Banks' legal counsel to refute any elements that they believe are inaccurate, and I'll leave them to do that if they choose to appeal.
Just in terms of Epsom, does Mr. Banks' resignation and the events surrounding that make it just that bit more difficult for ACTS to get back in and make an electoral accommodation with them more problematic?
I wouldn't draw that conclusion today. I mean, the reality of Epsom voters is that they're overwhelmingly national supporters, and that's the reality of that electorate. And yep, many of them have chosen in recent elections to split their vote, sometimes to our surprise. I mean, there have been the odd occasion where we hadn't thought that they would do that, and they have done that. That's because I think while those people overwhelmingly are national voters, they want to see a national-led government, and they're fairly convinced that, you know, any government is likely to require coalition partners.
So if an Epsom voter wants to see the right government, which candidate should they vote for this election?
Well, that's a very good question. I'm going to answer that question for you some weeks into the future. With as much clarity, hopefully, as you posed it.
Are you going to announce, so you're going to announce all the accommodations on one day in the election campaign?
Yeah, I'm going to give voters as much transparency about our thinking as is possible, but yes, we're highly likely to do it on one day.
During the campaign?
Not necessarily during the campaign, but before that.
Does that
How will
extend
you do
to
that? Will it be a press conference or a cup of tea buffet?
Does that extend?
I don't know. I'm sure I'll let you know somehow.
Does that extend to how you could work? You know, a bit more detail on how you could work with Winston Peters?
Well, it's pretty clear Winston Peters doesn't want any sort of political accommodation. I mean, he's made that clear through his whole career. He's not interested in that.
But what about cross benches, that type of arrangement?
So what? No, I think he's also made it pretty clear that he's not interested in having discussions with either Labour or National until an election. I mean, I think in a way that's interesting, but I think it can frustrate voters as well. I mean, they're probably interested to get a bit of a sense of how he might go and what he might do. But in the end, I think we all know that's not going to go anywhere between now and 20th of September. So look, come the election, we'll be doing everything we potentially can to put together a government. I'll let you know how those negotiations go if we're in that position to look like we can form a
But do you
government.
think, as a matter of principle, he should, and other parties should indicate which way they're going to go?
My own view is yes, or at least the sort of thought process that they would follow. Just because I think it's in the sense of MMP. I mean, we know that MMP drives coalitions. So in the sense, I've been very clear. 2008 and 11, I said I didn't think we were able to work with them, so I was ruled them out. 2014, I was clear and I've ruled them back in. People might like or hate that, but at least they can have a sense of where I'm going and what I'm doing. I think if he's going to go with the biggest party or whatever it might be, it'd be useful to sort of say those things. But in the end, it's up to him.
This man presumably killed in Syria. Do you know if he was fighting and if so, who he was fighting for?
I don't have enough details there to absolutely offer a comment.
And do you know how he died?
No, I don't. I don't even know he has died. As I said, I just know we've lost contact with him.
Is it possible to tell if someone is fighting, for example, with a terrorist cell, or if they're perhaps over there for humanitarian aid? Is there any way to differentiate?
Yeah, I would have thought so. I mean, generally, we can determine that.
So you know if he was fighting with a terrorist cell or if he was over there for humanitarian purposes?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair assessment. As a general rule, I mean, as I said to you, we don't always have perfect information on any New Zealander that travels to Syria. They may come from different locations at different times doing different things. They obviously, in theory, could register with the, of our diplomatic representation in that region, but it's very unlikely that they would. So, I mean, the truth is that we don't have perfect information on New Zealanders in Syria, but we have a pretty good sense of them. And we certainly have a good sense of some that were intending to travel to Syria that we stopped at.
And do you know if this man was over there for humanitarian purposes?
I don't know.
What do you mean when you say lost contact?
Well, we lost contact.
Did he know that you were in contact with him?
Don't know.
There's been a few comments recently about radical Islam in some of New Zealand's mosques. Are you concerned at all about that?
Concerned about the mosques, or
About
concerned?
the fact that supposedly there is radical preaching, I suppose, in some of the mosques around the country.
Well, I think it's really important to understand the process that we might follow, which, for instance, we don't target mosques. If the SIS is interested in gathering information about someone, it's not about a place, it's about an individual. It doesn't happen because we have a feeling, it happens because we have very strong information which would support a warrant being authorised. And then that warrant has to be co-signed by the Commissioner and myself. So we don't just get up in the morning and say, maybe in this location we might be a bit worried, so let's have a look. It doesn't work like that.
Are they is there much of a connection between these people, the guy in Daryl Jones in Yemen and these ones that have gone to Syria? Is there any sort of known connection between those people that have gone and chosen to fight in those sorts of places?
I wouldn't want to characterise it that way, no.
They say that actors.
Is Epsom the only place in which you consider doing a accommodation, cup of tea, whatever?
Did you say Epsom?
Yeah. Is it the only seat, or have you?
No, I think I've indicated that there's at least 3 that we will at least go through a process, I suppose, which is, potentially with United and Oharia, potentially with Conservatives, but they all have different issues.
So only those 3?
Yes.
You're in.
Well, I see the actors just put up Don Nicholson and the Southland. Is that another possibility of an act deal, or do you think that the farmers might be too traditionally national?
No, I don't think we can consider that. So.
Your office had confirmed to us that you would be at Field Days on Friday originally. Is Colin Craig he's going to be there that day as well? Is he the
Really?
reason for the timetable change?
No, it's to do with something my wife wants me to do on Friday afternoon.
So you're not trying to avoid Colin Craig?
No, I'm trying to keep on the good side of my wife. She's asked me to do something for her.
So you're bow screening.
No. Last time I answered questions like that, it made international media. No, not from my bowel screening. I think we're just about done, aren't we?
The small group of New Zealanders in Syria, could you give us an indication as to how many there are? Is there a range?
Sorry, one more time, Tona?
Small group of New Zealanders fighting in Syria, can you give us more of an indication as to how big that range is, how many in that group?
Look, it's the number of people that I would consider that have either gone or have been stopped going is small. You know, it's a handful.
Is that
To the best of the information I have.
We could expect more casualties out of there given the number that are in there, what we're seeing in terms of Australians, British dying.
It's possible, but you know, I don't have tremendous information. I don't have reliable enough information to say that, but I can't rule out that there are other people that are either there or travel there that somehow either carry a New Zealand passport or joint passports.
How many New Zealanders are registered in Syria all up?
I don't have that number, but MFAT will be able to give you that.
Just on your Obama trip,
Yep.
you going to play a game of basketball with them?
I hope not.
And just in terms of an independent entity to look at issues around electoral laws or wider sort of corruption issues, I understand that that's a prerequisite for ratification of the UN Convention Against Corruption. The government was looking at passing necessary legislation or introducing it at the end of last year, enabling us to ratify that treaty. I think Judith Collins talked about it when she got back from China late last year.
Right.
What's happened to that?
Don't know. You'd have to ask her. But at the end of the day, I think it's worth putting a bit of perspective around those issues in New Zealand, which is we rank, either number 1 or 2 or 3 in the world, but very high in terms of the least corrupt, the greatest transparency. I think you might want to get a bit of perspective around all these things. I mean, a lot of countries around the world have endemic corruption. They have all sorts of issues that cut to the core of their democracy. With the greatest respect, that's not the case in New Zealand. The fact that the leader of the opposition was dumb enough to send a tweet on the day of a by-election and didn't know the electoral law is sloppy, but I'd hardly consider it to be an earth-shattering event that the United Nations is going to be worried about. And so we just need to put a bit of perspective around that. I personally think that there are a lot of people that throw around the word corruption in New Zealand, and they might do it for political effect for you guys to report it, but actually New Zealand, in my experience of being here, is not corrupt. I think our judicial system, our police force, our public service, and actually our politicians are good, law-abiding, honest people. And the odd person might fall foul of the law, but a bit of perspective needs to be put around that.
Well, it's just in regards to that regional economies report last week. Is there much that can be done to boost regional economies and slow things like that urban drift and that sort of thing, aside from sort of natural resource?
Yeah, well, I think what the report shows is where we've developed economic opportunities in the region. You've seen much stronger both economic growth, lower levels of unemployment and higher levels of income, Taranaki being a great example of that, and the contrast of that is Northland. So it isn't just natural resources, but I think it is issues like the infrastructure that's available in those regions and maybe some other things that we can anchor in there. Sorry, I was going to say for the most part, actually, economic growth in the regions has been pretty strong.
Yeah, but is it sort of not largely, like for Taranaki, for example, is it not largely based around natural resources or oil and gas?
Well, in Taranaki's case, yes, it's natural resources, but it's also agriculture. It's a very big part of what they do there. But we have 18 basins in New Zealand that are potentially prospective. I mean, you have 18 locations where there's great opportunities to potentially expand in a sector that's not there. But every place is a bit different, and they all drive different things. But what we do know is if you have the right infrastructure, you're likely to get the investment in the people.
Would you consider things like sending government departments or encouraging sort of corporate headquarters type thing to move to the regions to sort of boost
corporates? We can't dictate what they do, but there have been and always will be examples of where it makes sense for a government department to locate some of its services somewhere. Sometimes it's consolidation, so sometimes it can be at the detriment of one part of the country for the benefit of another, and we've seen a little bit of that with the CRIs. But we did that strategically with Callaghan, for instance, and the locations that it's being placed. Okay, thanks, Ron.